welcome everyone. It really is our pleasure to welcome our friends and colleagues from Global Citizen to our talk this morning. Over the last decade, Global Citizen has leveraged the power of governments, corporations, NGO partners, and civil society, and I love this part, the artistic community to come around one common goal: to end extreme poverty. And in 2020, Global Citizen was most well known for producing the One World Together at Home and the Global Goal Unite for Our Future campaigns, which reach millions of people across 150 countries. And we're really excited that next week they are holding their Vax Live event, which will be broadcast on the 8th of May. And it's probably one of the first sort of calls to government to donate doses and resources to address the current pandemic crisis and some of the vaccination needs in developing communities and countries. It is really one of the first large-scale music events in response to COVID. And they're hoping to raise, which I'm very confident they will, 1.8 billion American dollars, which is 2.4 New Zealand dollars for the audience here. And we're really excited to see that they've got Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, will serve as campaign chairs on this as well. So Michael, welcome this morning. And Michael Sheldrick is the Chief Policy and Government Affairs Officer for Global Citizen, and he has written for Guardian, Forbes and Huffington Post, and currently oversees the grants, philanthropy, and impact and government relations team at Global Citizen. So welcome, Michael, and we'll hand over to you. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much. And it's a real pleasure to be with you today. I've got to say, you know, New Zealand is one of my favorite countries in the world. I've had the opportunity to visit many times coming from Australia, and can't wait, I'm sure once the pandemic's over, to get back there, because ideally it would be great to do this in person. So it's a real pleasure to be speaking to all of you and your country and everything everyone's doing. You know, what I want to, I guess, talk about today is, you know, very, very briefly break down our work at Global Citizen, our approach to advocacy. You know, I've had the joy, but also, you know, all of the trials along the way of being part of this since its founding. We were student activists in Australia over the past decade, more than 10 years ago. And so, you know, I've seeing us grow from just a few student activists to now an organization of millions of activists around the world. And I know in the Q&A, very happy to share some of our learnings, what we've learned sometimes the hard way along the way, what we're most proud of, and maybe some insights that might be helpful to everyone listening and watching today. But first, I just want to start off, and I hope this works okay. You never know with technology. But I would love to just start off with a brief video to give you an understanding of what we do at Global Citizen, and about our mission and model and what we do. Thanks. So for those that haven't heard of us, and maybe some of you did, particularly with our events last year, particularly at the start of the pandemic, you know, we're very much an international advocacy organization that, in our view, we see ourselves as working to propel a movement needed to end extreme poverty by 2030 and achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And really, at the core of our model is a combination of content, compelling content that reaches people that may not be interested in the development space, events, grassroots organizing, and our action platform. And we often call our formula this idea of pop meets policy, whereby we inform and educate global citizens on the major issues of our time, and importantly, provide them with an action platform to take action around the systemic causes of extreme poverty. And we inspire them to take action in exchange for incentives, cool rewards, you know, tickets to events, In the pandemic world, it's been a lot of online virtual experiences and other kind of rewards. But ultimately, through taking action, our hope is that we can encourage people to learn more about the issues, get more engaged, and really be part of a movement that isn't based on charity in the traditional sense, because we know no amount of charity or gala night dinners is going to be enough to end extreme poverty, but really as part of a movement where through the collective voice of millions of people around the world, we can create systemic change, which includes not just governments, but also holding corporations, philanthropists, foundations to account. Oh, can it? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I think everyone can hear me. Um, for whatever reason, it echoed there. But not just governments, but also foundations, businesses, and ultimately citizens as the major agent of change. And so, building on that, in our organization and around the world, we have offices in New York, in Toronto, in Johannesburg, in London, in Berlin, in Melbourne, Australia, and we have various staff based in other places, in other cities around the world, from Latin America to parts of Asia. But really, we focus on designing actions that can have the maximum impact. When I say action, that can be anything through emails, petitions, phone calls, tweets, or directed at world leaders, commitment makers, policy, key decision makers, really targeting them, not letting them off the hook, calling on them to make the policies we need to end extreme poverty. And really, and this was mentioned at the outset, through partnering with influencers, we really see ourselves as a platform to amplify the work of other partner organizations doing great, meaningful work to influence, the leaders of our time. And whether it's organizations like the World Food Program, the Global Fund, Education Cannot Wait, our goal is to support the on-the-ground critical work by removing barriers that might be caused by lack of political will, lack of funding, and really importantly, we none of the money comes through to us. We know what we're good at. We know what we're not. We're not programmatic experts. We see ourselves as campaigners, where we hold leaders accountable to the commitments they've made. And so it all flows directly. All of the pledges you hear about that you will hear next week all goes to the organizations that's doing the work. But we follow up with everyone in practice. We always say that accountability is key to delivery, and that really is the modus operandi of what we do. So based on our experiences, what do I think works best in advocacy? Well, I would say we can boil this down to 4 key steps. The first is choosing the right campaign. Secondly, and when I say the right campaign, implicit there is the right partners. We pride ourselves on working in partnership and making sure, whether it's a corporation, not-for-profit, government, really making sure that it's not transactional. At the heart of any great partnership is shared objective. Secondly, we see ourselves as the next key part of any successful advocacy approach is to project, amplify, and advocate. And here, most importantly, we always talk about telling a story. What is the story we want to tell? When I say telling a story, I'm not just talking about at our large-scale events. We say that all the time, whether it's going into a meeting with a member of parliament, whether it's speaking to our citizens. What is the story we want to communicate to them and invite them to be part of? And then thirdly, and this is what I think we're probably most known for, is using our social media events and ambassadors to then drive and influence decision makers. And then fourthly, and again, really, really importantly, measuring those results, seeing the impact you've made, and then really, really key, communicating that impact back to stakeholders, whether that's our citizens, whether it's the influencers who have given up their time, whether it's those who, you know, just over the past weekend, you know, Selena Gomez, who's our host of Vax Live, she spent time on her Saturday afternoon, decided to whip out her phone and tweet world leaders, actually including your prime minister, asking them to share vaccine doses now to those who most need it. And, you know, what was critical to her is when she was asking her fans to step on board, take that action, is then communicating the impact. What world leaders have responded and who do we need to chase and follow up? And that's how we try from there to generate this momentum that snowballs and leads to other commitments jumping on the line. So, you know, in summary, you know, through this approach, you know, we've been able to work on some of the most critical issues. I just wanted to share one story because often what we're faced with, and I say this as our chief policy officer, is how do we, that ability to tell a story, often we're faced with how do we take what is a very wonky development agenda and turn it into a narrative that's going to penetrate the public and drive people to action. And an example I want to use is around our work on sustainable agriculture. A couple of years ago, we were asked by an incredible friend of our organization, Gilbert Pongo, who is the former Prime Minister of Togo in West Africa and is now the president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. He asked us whether we would help campaign with him to raise $2 billion to support 100 million farmers around the world. The problem is International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. It's one of those acronyms, unlike WFP, UNICEF, that is little known outside of, you know, Rome, where it's based, or the UN agencies. And more than that, you know, when you get into sustainable agriculture, it can be hard to galvanize a movement around that. And so we were faced with this challenge. Okay, if we want to double the amount of funding that this organization receives to support farmers on the ground, how are we going to galvanize people? How are we going to tell that story? And, you know, it's funny, when I first went into IFAD and I said, we probably, in our very first story about this issue, we're probably not going to mention the word IFAD at all. You could see that their head of branding, communications, and other people, you know, their mouth dropped. They're like, what do you mean you're not going to mention us? And then I was like, yeah, we're probably not even going to use your logo, because what we need to do at first is get the issue front and center and really tell the story. And if we can do that, then you guys will be the beneficiaries of this, but you don't need to be the top line, because IFAD, you're never going to be able to build a movement behind that name. And so where we started, we really tried to figure out what is the essence of that story. And really the essence was twofold. The first it was about young people, and it was about opportunities. And it was about the fact, if you look in Africa, 2/3 of those living in extreme poverty in rural areas are farmers. And you look at the ability to lift people out of extreme poverty, particularly young people, agriculture is one of the best means to do that. And so in that case, agriculture was the means to the end, but it wasn't the end in itself. The end was young people, opportunities, and potential. And that's what we decided to lean into. The second key message was around climate change, and really focusing on, you know, the idea that, okay, who are on the battle lines, who is on the front lines when it comes to climate change, who is feeling the impact right now. And it's really farmers in many respects. You know, farmers in many cases, when you look at crop yields, you know, when you look at the rise of extreme weather events, it's farmer and it's agriculture which is bearing the brunt of this impact. And then when you look at also the sectors that are most going to be significant to any real reduction. It's also agriculture as well plays a big role. And so we decided in our storytelling, and this was a shift for our partners, you know, to move away from acronyms, development speak, a layer above that, focusing on, okay, where are the battlegrounds, front lines when it comes to climate change, and where is the opportunity for young people? And through that, and the story we were able to tell, working with EFAD, we were able to get Idris and Sabrina Alba on board, who have been tremendous advocates of this issue over the last year and a half. I had the opportunity to travel to them. Actually, it was my last trip, work trip, just before the pandemic hit, to Sierra Leone, where, as part of, you know, his heritage and homecoming, we were able to learn more about the issues, put a spotlight on this, and really recast what EFAD, what sustainable agriculture was about. And then through that story and the authenticity of their advocacy, we found ourselves, you know, meeting with everyone from President Macron all the way through to Alok Sharma, the president of the COP in Glasgow. And I think the final lesson from this was, again, not going in and making this about EFAD trying to just, you know, raise money for them in a mercenary sense, but trying to elevate the issue, looking at the outcome. What are we trying to achieve, and having a lot of success. And you know, so far that campaign still goes, but we're at $1.5 billion of the $2 billion we hope to raise. And our hope is we might have further success, you know, by September this year. The second issue I want to share is around our recovery plan for the year, and our recovery plan, you know, just to give you some insights into this, is around excuse me, our recovery plan for the year. And I think you can see the slide. Recovery plan for the year, when we at the end of last year were figuring out what to do this year, we knew that as much as we need to end the pandemic, we also need to kickstart the recovery to get us on track to achieve the global goals. We knew that probably in the world of both public opinion, but also political attention, there was probably little appetite to focus on all 17 of the goals. And so our aim with this recovery plan was, how can we simplify what needs to happen over the next 12 months if we're to get on track to achieve the goals, and back on track to end extreme poverty by 2030. You know, especially when we've got, you know, an estimated 160 million people set to be pushed into extreme poverty as a result of the pandemic. And so we simplified, which is often what we try and do, the 17 goals from, okay, what needs to happen over the next decade, what needs to happen over the next 12 months. And it became very simply, end the pandemic for everyone. 2, avoid a doubling of those going hungry. 3rd, provide education for all the 1.5 billion children who had their education disrupted in some way, not just those that can afford online remote learning. 4, reboot action on climate change in the lead up to Glasgow. And fifthly, advance equity for all. And so those sort of 5 points is what we've rallied our you know, our calendar around this year, and how we framed the year. And of course, we launched it an eclectic mix from Hugh Jackman to Billie Eilish, with John Kerry, President Biden's presidential envoy, to President Ramaphosa of South Africa. We launched that just 2 months ago, and very excited to share that we're rolling straight into the first milestone for that, is our Vax Live campaign, which is taking place on May 8th, that will be air on May 9th in New Zealand and Australia. And you'll be able to see this. It's going to be a YouTube original. and which they will promote it around the world. And really, our aim with this is twofold. If we say, okay, the first plank of that recovery plan is to end the pandemic for everyone, well, firstly, we need to encourage people to get a vaccine. But secondly, it's very hard to be hesitant about a vaccine if you don't have access to it. So it's also about encouraging global vaccine access. And as was alluded to yesterday, we were thrilled to announce that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have agreed to be campaign co-chairs of this campaign. And again, just like we did with Idris and Sabrina Alba, in a very authentic way, leaning into how they want to engage. And they've been using their voice right into the private sector, asking the private sector to donate to COVAX and for the pharmaceutical industry to make vaccines readily available. And so this will be our event that's taking place. We're busy churning around now. I'm literally looking up at the whiteboard of commitments which we're trying to get in. We've got our artists going out to promote, but this campaign really typifies all of the lessons I mentioned earlier, and you will see that in the rollout. And so I will pause there because I wanted to make sure there was enough time for questions, and I can always go on and talk at length. But before I throw to questions, I just want to go back and show a video. I mentioned our work with Idris and Sabrina Alba, how we recast our work around sustainable agriculture. And I just wanted to show a video of our work together on that. Yeah. So happy to answer any questions and throw it back to you. But it's a real pleasure to be here today and share any insights that might be of use to anyone.
Thank you, Mick. That was really, it's for me, it's really sort of refreshing to see some of the different takes that Global Citizen is doing in advocacy, which in many ways the NGO community's been doing for a number of decades. I particularly wanted to ask you a question around the risks and benefits of engaging with high-profile individuals or ambassadors in advocacy campaigns. What is it about Global Citizen that you're doing differently to how celebrity might have traditionally been engaged with?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for us, the key is authenticity. We're fortunate that a lot of the advocates we've worked with, now worked with us for many years, and they've become very steeped in the issues. And so, and that always begins, even when we do, our Global Citizen Festival, for instance, pre-COVID in Central Park, we would always insist that every artist do a 2-hour briefing with us. And excuse me, not just a 2-hour briefing that they can throw or punt to a manager, but actually them themselves, because we want them to understand. And we say, look, we're not going to force, we're not going to, preach. You've got to do what's right for you. But we want you to at least understand what this is about. And if you're open to engage in more, then we want to help. And I would say where we've had the most success is not where we try and have, unlike some of the other big NGOs, and it's fine, they have a lot of success. UNICEF, their Goodwill Ambassador program is second to none. But rather than us having like a, if you like a formula for how everyone has to engage, so everyone, promoting a sponsorship program to their fans, what we found is like, if you can make it tailored to what they're most comfortable around engaging, that's where you have the most success. And you shouldn't try and force someone to do something which they're not. So for example, Chris Martin, who's our Global Citizen Festival curator, when we had that same discussion with him, he said, look, you know, I'm not a world leader. I'm not a business leader. And I'm also not Bono. Like, it's not my thing to be going around speaking articulately on these issues. It's just not who I am. But what I can do is I'm a creative, I'm a convener, and I can use my voice to convince other artists and advocates to also use their voice for the Sustainable Development Goals. And so his commitment to the SDGs was a 15-year commitment with Global Citizen, that each year he would commit to basically help us convene somewhere in the world major gatherings with artists to promote the SDGs. So we did World Toilet Day in India in 2016, Hamburg and the G20 in 2017. In 2018, Nelson Mandela's centennial year in South Africa. So that was his contribution. Others are far more comfortable, like you saw with Selena Gomez on the leader on the weekend, with using their platform to call out world leaders and have a dialogue. Just last night, I was working with Priyanka Chopra. She's very passionate about misinformation. And so, you know, early on in the pandemic last year, she did an Instagram live with Dr. Tedros of the WHO. And even last night, she was doing a Q&A on her, you know, particularly for her fans in India, engaging around, you know, misinformation, what could be done, using her sort of status, if you like, to give experts a platform to weigh in on the policy. So where we found is when we say, look, we're not going to shove you, we're not going to try and shove you down your throat a specific, you know, program. If you don't want to ask your fans to contribute funds, that's fine. If you don't feel comfortable asking people to contribute funds, if you don't feel comfortable asking more leaders, like let's figure out what the best way to engage is here. And what we find is that that's when we have the most authentic engagements. I mean, last year, if you think back to when we did our One World Together at Home at the start of the pandemic, you might remember that we worked with Lady Gaga, and she very much convened that. And her big role was across all of the messaging and the scripting. I mean, what her unique contribution, other than she's an amazing performer, was really, she was really adamant that had to be, in her view, a love letter to the health workers on the front line. And that's what she, you know, through all the storyline, that was what she came back to and really pushed, and what she was really passionate about. So yeah, that I can give you lots of examples, you know, of where it's worked out, but it's been curated over many years, and I would say it comes with a degree of trust as well with many of these that we have worked with, that the artists trust us with, you know, not just their reputations and credibility, but they've all got limited time. And so they want to know that they're doing the most impactful thing that they can do as well. So I hope that answers some of your question at least.
Thank you, Mick. No, that certainly does, and particularly in a place like New Zealand and perhaps Australia, the size and access to the arts community is relatively easy. Sometimes we're not that many degrees separated from each other. I've got a question.
I would just say, sorry, just on that, because I've spoken obviously about, you know, a lot of the ones we work with, but we've worked with a lot of the local, regional, and those can be incredibly powerful, because we know ultimately at the end of the day that political will is driven locally. And I still think one of the most meaningful artist briefings I ever did was actually in Canada with this band called Winterfall, and they really, I mean, this band, you know, they were asked if we would come up, do a briefing, and they were in this community radio station. That night they had I think a small performance at a pub of several hundred people, like we're not talking thousands. And I remember sat at this radio station, they said, you know what, let's invite the local member of parliament along, because here, if we get several hundred of young people in his constituency, for him, that is that's a big big demonstration. And yeah, I came along, the member of parliament came along, and they had the crowd chanting these issues, you know, stop the cuts, you know, around issues of development. And this member of parliament, you know, went back the following week, gave a speech in parliament and referred to it. So I often think engaging local artists is just as important as engaging anyone with a global profile.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mick. I've got a question here from Marty from Christian Blind Mission. Would be interested to hear more on how Global Citizen tackles the measurement of results and impact of your advocacy. Are there some innovative tools or approaches, particularly metrics, that you can share with us about how you do that?
So we use, the main tool we use is Salesforce. Every commitment that we work on, we track, and we track ruthlessly in that, you know, we will log correspondence with potential commitment makers. We will log campaign evidence. So, you know, if we get replies or tweets or social media, you know, the idea is every campaign we've worked on has a very detailed record in Salesforce. And then within that, you know, we might have, as you know, advocacy, the challenge with advocacy is it's not like programmatic work. So when you're trying to say, okay, well, what is your impact? Third-party validation becomes really important. And so tracking all of that, but every commitment we would have campaigned on, you know, I can go in Salesforce, I've got it on my phone, our whole team has, and I can pull up that record and say, okay, this was the story of how that came about. These were the meetings that took place with these members of parliament on this day. You know, this was, you know, what we did in terms of petition. This is the number of people that signed that petition. And then what we would do is we also track the delivery of those commitments as well. And so, you know, you can pull up a commitment from 3 or 4 years ago that might have been announced. You can go back to last year, the One World Together at home, and we will follow where the money goes. As I said before, it never goes for us, but importantly, we want to make sure it arrives in the right place, and then track that the money is actually used for what it was pledged to do. We see ourselves, whether it's asking citizens to use their voice or whomever, we see ourselves as a responsibility to communicate back to them, you know, what the impact of their voice was, whether it's for good or bad. And if the commitment is off track and it's not been delivered, then we need to call it out and come up with strategies. And so we pride ourselves on the accountability. It's just as important to receiving campaign wins. I've got to be honest with you, early on as campaigners, we put far too much emphasis on just getting the campaign win, getting governments to respond. And over time, as you now work on this over a period of time, you realize just how important the sustained advocacy is, because when it's when the cameras aren't looking and when the pressure's not there that governments change or politicians might, you know, try and do something nefarious. Certainly in Australia, you know, our experience over the years, you know, has been when people aren't looking and watching the development budget with high profile, governments tend to slash and burn. But yeah, Salesforce is what we look at. And if you go on our website, Impact, we publish it. We're just about to go out with a new update in terms of the 50 billion or so commitments we track, how much of that has actually been dispersed, and also what's the number of lives that have actually been impacted as a result. And so we've been fortunate to have PwC give us some pro bono assistance on mapping out those due diligence and accountability frameworks. But it's super important, and we've got a great impact and accountability team. And I would be happy if anyone wants more detail to introduce them to anyone on this call. They would be happy to chat about our processes. And also, I'm sure, you know, we're not perfect on this. I'm sure we can learn a lot as well, and always looking for ways to improve. Yeah.
Thanks, Mick. I've got a question here from Josie.
Yeah, I've got two questions really, Mick. I know from doing some work with Global Citizen years ago, how important it was that the methodology of giving activists things to do, and that this is one of the sort of elements of success. So can you talk a little bit more about what sorts of activities that you do give potential activists to do? That creates the movement, really, doesn't it? Not just signing a petition, so what are some of the things that you give activists to do? And then maybe the second question was about your relationship with businesses. You just talked about PwC. It sounds like your relationship with the corporate sector is a real partnership in many ways. So about selling that shared value to your business partners, that's not just a transactional thing of give us some money. It's a really deep partnership by the sounds of it. So two big questions.
Yeah. So I would say on that, the first one, look, we always used to say that we ban the phrase awareness raising, and that action is our currency. And so for us, being specific and targeted is always super important. And so, you might have, it may not be petitions, it could be an email to an elected official, could be a tweet to a world leader, it could be asking someone to pick up the phone to a local elected official. For us, we try and zone in as much as possible on who are the key decision makers, what's needed in order to make this happen, what are the pressure points that need to bring to bear. And then secondly, what we do is we then have to balance out with, obviously, we call it the top of the funnel, because if you go too specific and you're out engaging like backslide millions of people, you can't go too specific, because if you're asking people to say ring Prime Minister Ardern, if you're outside of New Zealand, that may not be as relevant. And so it is this balance with being specific, but also providing enough actions at what we say top of the funnel that will get people on and get them on an action journey. But the overall goal is to embed people over time in continuous action. And we see that people will go from an entry level action, which might be low threshold, like signing a petition, to meeting with a local member of parliament or Congress, or picking up the phone. In terms of the second question on private sector engagement, we again, coming back to what I said earlier about doing it the right campaign and selecting the right partnerships, we learned early on that a partnership with the private sector that isn't aligned around a shared outcome is just painful. It's painful. Look, if you are going to be supporting a cause-based campaign, you can't measure the outcome of that in a what I would say, a purely self-interest, like narrow marketing perception, like, how many t-shirts am I going to sell if I back your cause related campaign? You just can't do that, right? We learned that it has to be around a commitment to a shared agenda, whether that's on sustainability, whether it's a commitment to a specific geographic area. Our partnership with Cisco was actually predicated around our work in West Africa, because we were looking to engage a whole movement of young people in places like Nigeria. And for Cisco, they had an interest, because for them, that was their future workforce. And so they had an interest in providing learning opportunities, right? So unless there is a shared understanding that can cut across several years, like for now that we've had enough experience, we just don't see it as a good use of our time if it's built along something around very transactional lines. And I can tell these partnerships now, and by the way, it's not just businesses, it could be other NGOs, but anyone that starts with, can you recruit celebrities to our brand campaign, or ask celebrities to help with our fundraising campaign, that isn't going to be it's not going to be an effective partnership, because it's transactional. It's not authentic. It doesn't work. And so we're thrilled that we've got you know, some great corporate partners. And again, we've built it over many years of trust, and you know, learning how to build effective partnerships. And in fact, I use Cisco as an example. They were the first one that really came out over the weekend as part of the Vax Live and committed $5 million to COVAX, which, you know, basically the reason why they wanted to come out first is they were interested in setting an example for other companies to follow. And then they were like, great, what other companies can we ring and ask to also contribute to this as well? So they've been a tremendous partner.
Thanks, Mick. I've got a question here. You know, we all deal with some really heavy topics and some very depressing global stats. Can you tell me about the importance of positivity in your campaigns? And I think what I'm also interested in hearing is your thoughts on, I think sometimes we're a little bit afraid of the what's in it for me question. And so I'm interested to hear from you your thoughts on the role of that in terms of creating momentum as well.
Yeah, look, everyone has a value proposition, whether it's a politician, you know, they want to do the right thing. They also might do it for geopolitical reasons. They might do it in response to pressure. They might do it for electoral benefit. The same is true with companies. The same is true with artists. You know, but what we try and do is we try and figure out, okay, make sure that value proposition aligns with a commitment to a shared outcome of what we're trying to achieve. I use the example of Cisco, their workforce in West Africa. You know, that's great, but they see that as a potential growth market for them, and they see engage in and hire in, you know, smart, capable, skilled young people as a way to do that. But therefore, then they also have a commitment to an education agenda and a learning agenda too. The same is true, you know, when we work with governments. I find it actually across the board with partners, and even sometimes with with citizens. You know, there is an exchange of value that might take place. We often say, you know, I said at the top of the funnel, you know, an incentive to enter the top of the funnel and become an action taker could be a particular reward, whether it's to, you know, get a virtual experience for Formula One, you know, attend a conference, or frankly, to get a, you know, a one-on-one Zoom experience with an artist, right? There's very well an exchange of value that takes place, but what we're seeing over time is that converts into long-term action taking, you know, and we see people, you know, who might only enter the draw 1 or 2 times a year for some kind of reward, and yet they will take action throughout the year. Yeah.
Thanks, Mick. So I'd like to invite anyone out there in our audience to offer up any final questions. Otherwise, I think we've got another question here. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question or put it in the chat.
And I, unfortunately, I have to probably leave in about 5 minutes. If
Sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well,
as a final question.
Final question, if there aren't any coming through. So how important, Mick, are events to your methodology, the way of advocating? Because you create these huge global events, which are amazing. So if you do that on a local basis, say in New Zealand or Australia or something, how important is it to create those kind of uplifting, feel-good events?
Look, the first event I ever did like this was in Perth, Australia, and as most of you would know, Perth's the most isolated city in the world. It's certainly not where you're going to get some big names, but it was important, and it was important in the context. In 2011, we were campaigning for the Australian government to increase its support for polio eradication, and we used as a hook the fact Australia was hosting the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Perth in 2011, and we found, you know, something like polio was very concrete, very tangible. And again, that idea of a value proposition, we know that most of these summits end up being talk fests, little come out in the way of outcomes. So we were banking on the fact that the government might have an interest in using this to supercharge polio eradication efforts, because of the 4 countries that were endemic at the time, 3 were Commonwealth countries. And we essentially were banking that they might see this as a win that they can point to and say, well, this did achieve something. You know, we didn't just have 50 leaders come or the Queen come and block traffic for several days and annoy everyone. And it was interesting, when we were meeting with the government, it became apparent very early on that they were looking for some sort of mandate to respond to. Basically, I think from memory it was, you can't blame politicians at the end of the day. We have to give them permission to spend what is in the end our money. And so this is where the idea of a sort of youth mini concert, and this was, you know, nothing compared to what you see. It was at best a couple of thousand people in Perth with local artists and people we got on. It wasn't, you know, aired on radio, but it wasn't on TV or anything like that. So that alone was able, and we used that to drive petitions. You know, that alone we were able to use back to the government as a platform, as a force moving mechanism. You know, we did media around it, calling on the government to respond. So that was very much, you know, an example of that where local events can work. And I think it comes back to what I was saying before, where you can use local artists really to engage local politicians and find a response. And often I find more power in that than at the global level, because it's easy when you're dealing with 193 leaders at the UN. It's easy to dilute the focus and everyone, you know, everyone can take cover. Whereas when you're specific and at the grassroots, you can really use events like that to hold local leaders accountable and to drive specific actions on policy.
Thanks so much, Mick, and that's absolutely brilliant and really fascinating to hear from our sector as well. So we won't hold you up any further, Mick, but I'd like to really thank you and the Global Citizen team for sharing with us this morning or your evening. And I want to say good luck for the VAX Live event next week, but I'm sure it's going to go fantastically, and I look forward to tuning the 9th of May and invite everyone around to my place to watch it on the big screen. And I may even advocate poor behaviour if that helps as well. So thanks again, Mick, and everyone for joining us this morning.